So now we're going to talk about a process that is similar in a lot of ways to photosynthesis, but is also kind of the reverse of photosynthesis. This is called cellular respiration. So instead of creating a sugar that will store the chemical energy, cellular respiration is going to take that stored energy and break it down so that it's actually a usable format for the cell. Okay, so in cellular respiration, you're going to have the sugars, like glucose that was created during photosynthesis, broken down into ATP using oxygen. So this happens in the mitochondria. Okay, so for cells that actually need a lot of energy produced, you'll actually see that they have quite a few mitochondria. For cells that don't need as much energy, they will actually have fewer mitochondria. Mitochondria have their own DNA, okay, so they can replicate on their own, right? They can respond directly to the energy needs of the cell by replicating on their own, okay? Mitochondria and chloroplasts are really the only two organelles that have their own DNA and can do that. Most of the other ones are just based on like what comes out of the nucleus controlling how many of them there are going to be. Okay. There is, sorry, that's Potter. All of a sudden decided he had an itch. There is a theory as to why these organelles have their own DNA. They believe that a long time ago, mitochondria and chloroplasts were actually their own organisms. So they were single-celled organisms and basically created a symbiotic relationship between another cell and the precursor to the mitochondria. Okay, so basically the mitochondria was a single-celled organism that was really good at producing energy and then just kind of formed this beneficial relationship with another cell where that cell probably tried to eat the mitochondria, and then they kind of reached a bargain where the mitochondria would provide energy for the cell, and the cell would provide the mitochondria with food and protection from the outside environment. So, anyway, so cellular respiration is split into two types of reactions. So just like photosynthesis was split into light-dependent and light-independent, cellular respiration is split based on the need for oxygen. So you have the anaerobic, which does not need oxygen. So the AN comes from the prefix anti, okay, so no oxygen. These reactions, or this reaction, will actually take place in the cytoplasm. Okay, and it has a specific name which we'll get into in a little bit. Then you also have the aerobic reactions. So these require oxygen, and those are the ones that actually take place in the mitochondria. So there are actually three different stages in cellular respiration that are split into the anaerobic and aerobic. Okay, so first up we have glycolysis. So in glycolysis, this is where the actual glucose molecule comes into play, and then it actually gets broken down into two 3-carbon molecules that are called pyruvate. It is an anaerobic process, so it does not require oxygen, and it takes place in the cytoplasm. So basically, if you are being if you're not getting enough oxygen, your body will actually still keep going through glycolysis up to a point, okay? And you can see it does actually produce a small amount of ATP. Obviously not as much as the 38 that we were talking about a couple sections ago that can be produced through all of cellular respiration, but it's enough that it keeps things moving until oxygen levels pick up, at least up to a point. Okay, so it will split the glucose molecule into these two 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate, not the G3P that we saw in photosynthesis in the Calvin cycle. Okay, this is a different 3-carbon molecule. Okay, different things bonded to it, different organization of the atoms. So this one is pyruvate. and then also produces a net 2 ATP molecules. And net in this case just means that you actually have to add 2 ATPs in order to kick this cycle off, this glycolysis off. But then through the process of glycolysis, it actually produces 4 ATP. So you put 2 in and you get 4 out. So it's a net gain of 2 ATP molecules. So cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. And it does also have another cycle in it. This one is called the Krebs cycle, or also known as the citric acid cycle, which we'll get into later on in this section, I believe it is. The Krebs cycle is designed to transfer energy to the electron transport chain. So if you remember in photosynthesis, the electron transport chain was the first thing that we had. Now it's the last one. Okay, so the Krebs cycle actually takes place in the mitochondria in what's known as the matrix. So that is inside the inner membrane. So you have the outer membrane, you have the inner membrane space, you have the inner membrane, and then you have the matrix. Okay, so yeah, if you are a fan of the Matrix movies, it's kind of funny, but the Krebs cycle will take those 3 carbon molecules, those pyruvates, from glycolysis and break them down even further. It makes a small amount of ATP, but it also makes a lot of energy-containing compounds that then get passed off into the electron transport chain. This is also where you get your release of the carbon dioxide, okay, and your energy-carrying molecules. And then finally you go into the electron transport chain, which produces the largest amount of ATP. It does actually take place across the inner membrane inside the mitochondria, so going from the matrix into the inner membrane space. And then the energy from the Krebs cycle is actually passed into the electron transport chain, and then it uses kind of a very similar process that we saw in photosynthesis to create a whole bunch of ATP from that. This is also oxygen is also needed for this process, okay? And then you get your max amount of ATP produced in this reaction. You also get water released as a waste product. So you might not necessarily think of water being a waste product for cellular respiration, but if you've ever breathed on a mirror, okay, and you see it fog up, that's actually water coming out, water vapor coming out in your breath. So you do actually produce some water through cellular respiration. Okay, so the overall reaction is exactly reverse of the overall reaction for photosynthesis. So where photosynthesis took carbon dioxide and water to produce oxygen and glucose, cellular respiration starts with your glucose molecule and 6 oxygens, and then breaks them down, rearranges them, pulls all the energy out, and releases 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters per glucose molecule. So this is kind of the depiction of the mitochondria and where everything is taking place. So you have glycolysis that is taking place in the cytoplasm, okay, and then you have the Krebs cycle. You have your pyruvates here that enter the Krebs cycle in the matrix, okay, and then release your carbon dioxide and a couple ATP, and then also produces those energy-carrying molecules, which are going to pass into the inner membrane and enter the electron transport chain. And that's where you're going to get the majority of your ATP, and you're also going to use oxygen and produce water, okay? So if you'll notice, you have your anaerobic processes are glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, and then your aerobic process is the electron transport chain. Okay, and again, you can read this reaction as 1 glucose and 6 oxygen produce 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water. Okay, So the reactants in photosynthesis are the same as the products of cellular respiration. So they are exactly flipped of each other. Okay, so this kind of compares the two, where in photosynthesis you have your light energy coming in. Cellular respiration, you have your heat energy going out. Okay, and then in photosynthesis, you have carbon dioxide and water coming in, and then sugar and oxygen going out. And then in cellular respiration, you have your sugar and oxygen coming in, and your carbon dioxide and water going out. So they are the exact opposite of each other. All right, so talking about glycolysis. So glycolysis is needed for cellular respiration, because if you just have glucose, you can't actually input that directly into the Krebs cycle. It has to be broken down. So glycolysis will actually produce the pyruvate, which will then enter cellular respiration, the rest of it, the Krebs cycle, when oxygen is available. So 2 ATP molecules are actually used to split the glucose molecule, and then you produce 4 ATP molecules through this process. Okay, so you get 2 net molecules of ATP released, and you also have 2 molecules of NADH produced. Okay, so this is where I talked about this in the photosynthesis chapter. You have your NADPH is for plants, so P for plants or photosynthesis, and then just your NADH is for cellular respiration. And then again, your products from glucose also include the 2 molecules of pyruvate, which are your 3 carbon molecules. Okay, so glycolysis, kind of a summary, produces 2 net ATP, 2 NADH, and it uses NAD plus to form those, and 2 pyruvate. Okay, so this is the process here. First up, you're going to add in your 2 ATP to the glucose. That's going to split it in half, okay? And then you're going to have 2 NAD pluses and 4 ADPs come in, and that's going to help rearrange these 3 carbons, okay, these 3 carbon molecules into pyruvate. So basically, the 4 ADPs and the 2 NAD pluses are going to come into these 3 carbon molecules in the middle here and mug them for energy and leave 2 pyruvate behind. Okay? All right, talking about the Krebs cycle, we're actually going to stop here and pick up in the next video. Still got a couple minutes, but this is a good stopping point.